Hi, everyone. Welcome to Informed Dissent, a news podcast that brings you dispatches from the gender culture war. I am Ben Appel, the author of Cis White Gay, The Making of a Gender Heretic, and I'm here with my co-hosts, author and journalist Lisa Sellen Davis, and Gender Clinic whistleblower and co-executive director of LGBT Courage Coalition, Jamie Reed. Today we have Sarah and Corey are not joining us today. They're out of town. We have a very special guest today. We're joined by Maud Maron. She's running to be Manhattan's next district attorney. She said she's running, quote, to restore safety and sanity to our streets and subways. Maud worked as a public defender for over 2 decades at the Legal Aid Society in the Manhattan and the Bronx criminal courts and taught criminal law at Cardozo Law School. That's actually where my someone I know very close to me got his LLM. Maud is an educational advocate and a fierce champion of free speech. She won a First Amendment case against the New York City Department of Education just last year, and she writes for the New York Post and elsewhere. She's also a mom of 4 children who are all New York City public school graduates or students. Welcome, Maud. Really great to have you here.
You
Uh,
have me and my 9-year-old who's making some noise in the background.
okay,
So
no
give me
problem.
a
That's
moment,
great.
guys. Just give me one quick second.
No problem. So what I'm gonna we'll start with is I wanted to ask Maud specifically actually about that First Amendment case against the New York City Department of Education that she won last year. Maud, can you tell us about that?
Sure, there's nothing like a First Amendment win to make a girl happy. But first of all, Lisa, Jamie, and Ben, thank you for having me on. I love all of you, sort of individually, what you stand for, what you've been doing, and what you've been up to, and I'm just happy to be here and chatting with you. First Amendment wins. We went into, um, the case was because one of the I was sitting then, still am, just wrapping up a term as a school board member. But I was sitting on my school board, and there's we call them community education councils in New York. There are several of them throughout the city. One of the school boards decided that if you were guilty of wrongthink, you couldn't come to their meetings. Their meetings were on Zoom. They should have been in person, but there were all sorts of problems going on. But the big problem, and the First Amendment problem, was think like us or you don't get to come to a public meeting. And that's not how school boards work anywhere. And they were very specific. They didn't like an education advocacy organization that I was part of that was pro-merit. They didn't like Moms for Liberty, which is a silly thing not to like in New York because there's really almost no Moms for Liberty presence in New York. Although I had publicly said Moms for Liberty has some good people doing good things, and that was enough to get me on the list of bad thinkers and wrong thinkers. So that was going on, and we went into court saying you can't do that, myself and 2 other plaintiffs. But there was also this other component, which was the thing that was most relevant for me, which was the New York City school system, largest in the nation, close to 1 million kids, had passed this thing that they called a code of conduct regulation. It was Chancellor's Regulation D210. It wasn't really a code of conduct. It was really a speech code. You couldn't say things that made other people mad. So it was poorly and stupidly drafted. It was a First Amendment challenge just waiting to happen. But we went into court and said this, you can't regulate the speech of parents like me who are elected to represent, school districts by saying if other people are offended or upset or feel harassed by your speech that you could be kicked off the council. Well, that's what they said. That's what they tried to do. And we won by getting that. It's an ongoing case, but I'll tell you what the win was. In June of last year, earlier in the year, in February or March, a New York Post reporter called me and asked me what I thought about a very virulently anti-Semitic op-ed that was at my daughter's school. I said what I thought. I don't mince words. The New York City school department said, oh, you can't say that. You're harassing a student by saying that, which is absurd because it was what I was commenting on is the fact that this anti-Semitic drivel that was in the school newspaper had been published under the byline anonymous. Well, it's hard to harass anonymous, right? But anyway, they wanted to get rid of me. So they kicked me off the council. I went into court and said, you can't do that. Not only is it not, proper to kick me off this council, it violates my First Amendment rights because you're kicking me off for something that I said to a newspaper reporter. And we won a preliminary injunction, which reseated me to my seat on that council, and that was the big win. The case is still going on because the New York City Department of Education suspended enforcement of this unconstitutional speech code and keep promising to redraft it. They have not yet been able to draft it in a way that satisfies their woke soul and the First Amendment at the same time. So they're stuck in we want to prohibit speech that causes offense, and the First Amendment doesn't let us do it. And they still seem to be having some internal drama figuring out how to solve that problem. So the case is still pending, but the win, the big, beautiful win, Trump's got his big, beautiful bill out there, and I had my big, beautiful win. The big, beautiful win was me getting reseated to my education council, because you're not allowed to kick off women, even TERFs like me, who say the wrong things. And let me add one little point to this. While the technical reason they removed me from the council, the school, lawyers and folks removed me, was because of something I said about anti-Semitism. Every newspaper, including the New York Times, who covered the removal, referred to my opposition to the gender guidelines as a reason why the school board wanted to get rid of me. They don't like me for a lot of different reasons. I think merit-based education is good, that tests are not racist, that literacy is the problem, not, crazy Marxist ideas being taught in our schools. But the thing that really gets them is that when I say trans women are men, children should not be, told that there's something wrong with their bodies, and that gender ideology is bad and dangerous for kids, and we shouldn't teach it in our schools. I mean, what I say officially is there should be no boys and girls sports, but I privately and publicly, say these other opinions that I have that are gender critical. And like I said, even the New York Times said I was like a thorn in the side because of my advocacy around the gender issues. So, they had their official reason why they removed me, which was unconstitutional. And then they have this sort of what everybody else thought was the real reason, which is basically she's too turfy.
So the gender resolution preceded this First Amendment case,
Yes.
so all of that. So tell me about the resolution that
I
got you in trouble.
passed a resolution through the council I sit on, the Community Education Council District 2, in March of last year, that said we should revisit the 2019 gender guidelines. It was vanilla, right? It was just it wasn't a flame throwing. It was very polite and respectful. It traced the history of the Public School Athletic League, which was founded as an all boys activity in 1901, and talked about the different challenges that girls had to bring back when the New York Civil Liberties Union used to do things like protect girls' rights. They were saying girls didn't have enough field space and playing time, and there was efforts to make sure girls got equity and parity within sports issues. And I traced some of that. And then I said in 2019, the biological sex category was changed to be replaced with gender identity. But when it was done primarily through what were then called like the gay straight alliances, and that group, having conversations with those folks to replace biological sex with gender identity. And really what they did is leave out female athletes, coaches, parents from that conversation, because they sort of decided that the whole issue was, how do the gay kids or the trans kids or the LGBTQ kids feel about this? And they didn't say, how do female athletes feel about it? And how does this affect these other communities? And I said, politely, but yes, a little trolling, because DEI is not really my jam, which is like, if we're going to be inclusive, where the New York City school is always like inclusive. Oh, let's be inclusive. Let's include the female athletes and the coaches and the parents in this conversation. By now, it's been 5 years. We've seen the impact. Let's have a conversation that includes all the shareholders, the stakeholders. And they said, no, how dare you, transphobe, bigot, you offend everybody, you make us all mad, and blah, blah, blah. 17 different Democratic officials wrote a letter accusing us of causing harm. Of course, I didn't harm anybody. I just wrote down some words in a paper, which as a free American woman, you're allowed to do. They disagreed. They can write, they get to write. I strongly protect the right of every dopey person like Jerry Nadler to write their crazy lunatic letters accusing me of wrongthink. I fiercely protect their right to write such stupid things, but they don't get to shut me up. And that's what they've been trying to do.
Right, right. And to be clear, that resolution was passed on the
Eight to
committee.
three.
8-3. So 8 people voted
Yes,
for it.
myself
Okay.
included.
So obviously, a lot of folks who listen to this will be familiar with Maud's story. Some people won't, but many might know that the school board meetings for District 2 in Manhattan have been showdowns week or month after month for since when? For a year and a half, 2 years now?
Yeah, I passed that resolution through the council in March of 2024, and for a year and a half, trans activists, most of whom, some do have kids in our school system, but most of whom do not, have been showing up and dancing and humming and noise making and generally being ridiculous. But look, some of those folks are deeply earnest in their belief. Like they think that this is horrible and terrible and that trans people are being hurt. And to those people, I intellectually and morally disagree with them, but I understand showing up to say, I'm horrified by this happening in my town. But there's a lot of grifters in the group. And there's a chief grifter, this linebacker of a man who refers to himself as Elena Daniels, who shows up and I'd have to go look it up. But when he first introduced himself, he said he was like a white, queer, neurodivergent, non-binary trans woman, or so. It was like everything in the kitchen sink. And he shows up and he raises money off of this protest. He does, Instagram posts where he has people come and meet and brainstorm ways to disrupt our meetings and
is also running an after school program, which I do not know if it's receiving any funding. I just wanted to interrupt to say I've never come to a meeting. This is my school district. I do not want to deal with those people. And I also completely support their right to repeat falsehoods and cocoon themselves in their beliefs and their moral panic. But I don't think that behavior it is protected by the First Amendment in terms of the disrupting and preventing other people from speaking. And in the end, it intimidates even people like me from coming to, and I've watched so many live streams where someone very nuanced and reasonable, some butch lesbian gets up and says, look, you're my community and I understand, but I'm also an athlete, and anyway, and then you get Macarenaed into oblivion.
Right. Yep. They call them their jazzy tactics, that week's jazzy tactics, right? And Lisa, we know about this, right? Because you, me, and Corey were invited by Maud to speak at a District 2 meeting in January, right? It was January. And so we got to see for ourselves, because the panel was about gender ideology in schools. And Maud had each of us. The turnout was actually, according to Maud, very low compared to other, extremely low.
We were in a subcommittee meeting. Like
right.
Had folks coming, so it was a small meeting. I was very grateful to the people who came, and I had said, like, you guys want to come and talk about gender ideology every week at our main meeting, where parents want to talk about the academic issues and the school issues. And so then when I set up a meeting to say, come talk to the people, I'll spend time talking about what I think and having voices of people that I think make a lot of sense on this issue. And we got a small turnout for that group, but credit to the people who showed and who spoke, many of whom don't agree with me. And those folks came and we had a great conversation, which is on the YouTube channel for that. It's called CECD2, Community Education Council District 2. You can go to that YouTube channel and see the conversation that we had. And I thought it was a fantastic, good conversation. But they prefer to show up at the main school board meeting, which has, Lisa, to your point, because it's an important point, a First Amendment issue, they have been engaging in what's like the heckler's veto. When they started, when anyone spoke who didn't agree with them, they would stand up, turn their backs and hum. At some point, they brought noise machines in it. And even when their behavior, because you have the right to protest and to sometimes do it loudly, and even when their behavior hasn't crossed that First Amendment line, they did effectively drive parents out of the meeting. Their parents used to come to talk about some academics that they've just stopped coming because you have to sit through multiple sessions of people talking about trans, extreme trans ideology and how my mere presence, makes people feel unsafe or some such nonsense.
And mine.
Yes, of course.
Right.
But this is the atmosphere in New York City, to kind of segue into the other things we're talking about, which is no matter what is going on in the rest of the country, no matter this reckoning that has been happening. I mean, much to my shock, because I did not think, because of Trump derangement syndrome and because I disagree with a lot of what I see as actual cruelty coming from Trump and the people. And I was very skeptical of the hard hammer kind of approach. And yet you see even the prominent Democrats, even Sarah McBride, who is a very, very radical trans activist in office at the national level, is giving an interview to the New York Times saying, we went too far. And then you have the 2 weeks ago, the Nicholas Confessori article in the New York Times Magazine, which also has adult transsexuals saying we went too far, and not just in talking about school policies with boys playing in girls sports, and not just with self-ID that allows that to happen, but of course with the whole breaking the gender binary and removing any rooting in reality that even the old school transsexuals were like, we're men and we're trying to look like women and that's what we want. Right. And so it's been inclusive. It's been including these adult transsexual voices. It's been including some gay and lesbian voices. We had Andrew
detransitioner voices.
And detransit. Well, it's not as many of those as we would like, but there's a national reckoning that you can be a liberal, a feminist, a gay person, even a transsexual, and object to a lot of what is happening. In New York City, that is in our institutions, in our politics, in our schools, in our liberal bubbles, that is not happening.
True.
And I know that New York City is not the world. I mean, right. I know because I went to graduate school in a suburb of Phoenix, Arizona, and I was like, you
briefly left.
Oh my God. I've never seen it before. I've lived in San Francisco and New York and college towns. So I had never seen America before. Right. And this is not America. Yeah. But I think we want to understand, how the largest city in America could still be putting up this veneer and believing in it. I mean,
well, can I, this is like
go anywhere.
Well, I'm going to transition the politician that I am to what I'm doing in my political life, but it really, really relates, Lisa. And it's like, I used to be a Democrat. I was a Democrat for over 30 years. I ran as a common sense Democrat. I hadn't said radical, crazy things like, men can't become women. I had just said hashtag I stand with J.K. Rowling back when I was running as a Democrat. And that was enough to infuriate my party. I mean, I was opposed to defund the police and to COVID lockdowns and to all sorts of other, bad decisions about public school education, which I know a lot about. But it was really my saying, like, I think J.K. Rowling is pretty reasonable in what she was saying. And she too was saying kinder, gentler things in a way back when. I think for many of us coming from the left, we start off saying, oh, of course I'll respect your pronouns, and of course I'll do this and but just the one thing that I want to bring up. And it was always like, how dare you? No, you have to be where we are, as far left as we are at all times, or else you're a heretic. And for that reason and many, many others, won't trace it all here, but I'm running as a Republican. I've joined the Republican Party. I'm running on the conservative ticket and the Republican ticket. And part of it is because there's no room for debate or dissent on a whole range of issues in the far left that governs New York City right now, right? The simplest thing in the world to do in response to the resolution I wrote would have been to say, sure, we'll have that conversation and say the law of the land in New York is gender ideology is what governs your participation in sports. That's the law, and that you could gather up tons of people to say, we think it should stay that way. Like, I could have just lost on the merits of that conversation, with people, but they're, I think they won't have that conversation because what we've been seeing, and what the one article you didn't mention was Andrew Sullivan's New York Times article that just came out, and he traced some of the numbers in terms of polling. People are still overwhelmingly supportive of gay people and of transgender people's right to not be discriminated against, while at the same time rejecting the extraordinary overreach of men and women's sports, of female spaces being obliterated by this trans policy and that stuff. So I think Americans are overwhelmingly, genuinely inclusive and supportive and anti-discrimination, but people have these common sense limits. Watching these boys steal sports titles and glory again and again and again offends people's sensibilities. And it's one of those things where, like, you don't need a degree in gender ideology or to understand. I remember a few years ago meeting this trans person who was mad at me, and I was still in the Democratic fold, supposedly, and we were jarring on Twitter a little bit. And then there was a DM where he said, like, let's meet. And I met this person, and they were just, for me, like a kind of heartbreaking this skinny, sort of frail guy who was wearing a ridiculous dress and these boots and these things. And he was talking about his parents, referred to himself as female, as a trans woman. And I just honestly felt sad for this person. But at some point he was explaining to me the difference between trans woman as two words or trans woman like as a single word. And it seemed to like connote these important things. And I thought, like, most Americans can't follow you down these rabbit holes. These are all about your own crazy thing. And I couldn't, I was like, I know a fair amount about some of this stuff and I can't even follow where you're going. But it was so wrapped up with like identity, and it's so navel gazing and self-involved and so great. But like the boys and girls sports, the guy driving his pickup truck, an immigrant mom who doesn't speak that much English, like your regular everyday people can be like, that's not right. That's not fair. And it's very easy to see the unfairness of it. But in New York, to Lisa's point, every politician has decided to go further and further to the radical left, which is why we just elected a lunatic guy as not me, I'm not a Democrat anymore, so I take no responsibility for Zoran Mandami being elected as the candidate for the Democratic mayoral candidate for November. But he's got so many bad ideas you wouldn't know where to start. But one of them is let's spend more. He wants to Trump-proof New York. So if the stuff that you guys were referring to about Trump, where he's getting things right and understanding there's two sexes and the EO and the Title IX and everything, this Mamdani character wants to spend $65 million, I think, to make sure that there's gender affirming care, which still sounds much nicer than it is in reality. And that's one of about a zillion bad ideas he has. But yes, Lisa, we're in this silo of like the rest of the world is catching up. Even the New York Times is saying, like, let's talk about this gender ideology stuff. And every politician that is trying to drum me out of every public space around, which tells me I'm doing the right thing again and again and again, is not willing to go there. They're doubling and tripling down on hardcore radical gender ideology.
I just want to give for the non-New Yorkers a little background.
I do want to jump in a minute, Lisa.
Okay. Well, I'll just for this part. So this 33-year-old Zoran Mamdani, I had no idea who he was, but I started seeing the posters, fantastic graphic design. And my first thought was, I love the name Zoran and I love this graphic design. whoever this is, I'll vote for him. But then when I learned more about him, I started calling him Zofran, which I guess someone will tell me I'm a racist for that, but that's the nausea drug that I have.
It is the nausea drug. It's a great drug.
But you know, I consider myself, I probably most closely aligned with democratic socialism. And I believe that in exchange for my paying my taxes and doing my duty, the government has responsibility, roads, libraries, schools, and societal participation in helping families raise children to be good citizens. And so, you know, I like some of the policies he proposes. You know, I think creating more rent stabilized units is a good thing. That's one of his things. I think universal childcare is a good thing. I think that $65 million for medical interventions that you know, we just heard so much evidence. I mean, everywhere there's a reckoning, like not everywhere. Germany dug in, France dug in, but honestly, it's very clear from the fact that many reasonable countries have stopped doing this or banned it or haven't or trying to figure out an ethical way to do it and can't yet.
Yep.
And that some countries have said we're not going to do evidence reviews, so we're going to make these guidelines based on a human rights framework and not an evidence framework. That there is no, based on that, there's no consensus, and there is no medical evidence driven way to do it. And so that part I really object to. And I find some of his rhetoric, and I even find his reasonable stance, which is I promise to consider stances I disagree with, opinions I disagree with. I can't remember how he put it. And I'm just like, okay, but you're not, now you have to be the mayor for Staten Island where they love Trump. Like, you have to be the mayor for me, a ostensibly a kind of socialist light who is now painted as right-wing because of my moderate views on other things. And, you know, do I like free buses? Sure, but the MTA has no money. And I basically, you know, I'm like, city-run grocery stores. This isn't just socialism. We're heading towards communism. And basically the cartoon that somebody should be drawing is like kids getting a sex change on a free bus that's operated by a mentally ill homeless person while eating government cheese. So, you know what? We should ask AI.
I sort of think that's an ad that Eric Adams or Curtis Lewa could go with.
All right. You heard it here first. I'm sorry, Jamie, I had to just spout all that out. Would you like to speak now?
I actually would love to jump back to this campaign in a minute, but there's been something that Maud brought up that I know I've had this conversation with Lisa a little bit before. What piqued you first, Maud? Was it COVID or was it trans? Because this COVID science question and denial, I feel like most of our listeners and the people that, you know, I interact with were piqued around trans, but I feel that tug has been there around COVID too, especially for those of us who are parents whose kids got essentially sent home for I feel like my kids were sent home for 2 years.
Yeah. 2 years of disrupted school. Yeah. For me, it was definitely education and school stuff, but it predated COVID. For me, my eldest boy is turning 17 next month, turning 19 next month.
Okay.
And my daughter's 17. I have 3 teenagers and a 9-year-old. So for me, it was, I got involved my kids were in public school, and I got involved in public schools. So, you know, I went to one of these, what are called community education council meetings first over an issue around access to pre-K and, you know, things that weren't really dramatic at all. But then I started to, you know, Bill de Blasio was trying to make really big changes in our public schools. And one of them was to get rid of the specialized high school entrance exam. It was a straight up merit versus equity fight in New York City. And it blew up to a big fight. And I got, front and center by being
Would this be like a gifted program?
Yes, exactly. Like
Okay.
trying to get rid of a magnet school or gifted and
Okay.
program schools. And
Okay.
I was like, well, why would we do that? We should make more. That was back when I thought, let's bring data and logic and reason to the debate. And I would say, well, this makes no sense because these schools actually cost less to run per student, that they have great results. Why are we going to get rid of the schools that most parents are working their butts off to get their kids into
Okay.
and try to create more schools, the kind of which are failing to teach basic literacy to kids that are like these community schools with wraparound services and It just, there were there's this big RAND report that goes into how the community schools are not, delivering on the promises they make and not delivering on basic education. And it was like we would show up with like charts and graphs and then it was like, you're a bigot, you're a racist, these schools don't have enough Black kids in there, therefore it can only be because of racism. And you're like, well, that, actually there's lots of other reasons that we should look at and talk about. And I spent some time grinding the gear. I ran for office, I got elected to this school council, wrote resolutions as one does when you're on the council talking about those education issues. And then the schools got shut down, right? And then 2020 was like the peak of woke defund the police, bad public safety policies, and the education stuff that I was working on being really, really, blowing up. It's like one bad idea after the other was being promoted and pushed, and I was opposed to them. I founded an education advocacy group with several parents who were like-minded and did that work. The COVID stuff, yeah, like it's very triggering because it was so authoritarian and so illiberal. And to go back to what we started talking about with the free speech stuff, like if you said, I don't think masks work and I don't think we should use them and I don't think we should social distance 4-year-olds who need to be in, my youngest was 3 in March of 2020 and they shut down his nursery school and he never went back to nursery school the day of, what I mean? And then when he showed up for pre-K at our local public school pre-K, he was one of 3 kids. He was one of 3 because they were dividing the classrooms. And hold on for one.
Got a disruption. Go ahead.
But we have had this kind of COVID
there is a lot of overlap between people who have the same kind of feelings about COVID, DEI, and gender. But I wonder if your question, Jamie, is also about, a lot of people learned during COVID that the government could overreach based on either suppressing science or misinterpreting, and that this was the first time for a lot of liberals that they saw, oh, you can just basically lie about the science or try to twist it into anything you want, and then
or change it back and forth too. I mean, masks at the beginning, it was, oh, they don't work.
Yeah.
Was the messaging.
Totally. Here in New York, Jamie, that was absolutely true. They were telling us. And then it was like,
part of that I always wondered was because they knew they didn't have enough.
Exactly. It was
that. They didn't have enough of the masks that do work.
Yes.
So they were like, masks don't work because we don't have enough of the real ones.
Right. No, 100%. And that institutional trust and faith fell apart once people realized it made no sense. And for me, it was like the education battles had laid the groundwork for realizing our institutions are impervious to logic and reason and are really operating based on sort of ideological dogma and not so much reason and debate. And then the COVID stuff was that on steroids, right? Because you would go with like all sorts of stuff to explain, your point of view, and nobody was interested in. By that point, it became like that. I got that point. My windows are open. I don't know if you can hear all that noise. It's always noisy here. Okay, good. You don't hear how noisy it is out on the street. And then the gender stuff is because I had kids in middle school. Like you couldn't have kids in middle school or, young kids in New York City public schools and lots of other places without them getting an overwhelming dose of gender ideology being locked out of school, being in sports programs that wouldn't let kids who were unvaccinated. They had my kids who played soccer, they wanted them masked playing soccer outside. I mean, it was so stupid. And then those kids who got they were kicked out of school, their sports programs ended, like dance programs ended. And then they're online where there's an endless number of stupid TikTok videos to go down talking about how you might be born in the wrong body and all of this endless like trans influencer stuff. It was like like a perfect storm of conditions.
Black Mirror episode. But
Yeah.
when you talk
I want to ask, sorry, I
go
want to
ahead.
ask you one more thing, Maud, which you can feel free to say, I'm not going there, but we have similar aged kids. I think Lisa does too. I mean, I have what is he, 16 and a 15-year-old,
Right.
they experience the similar things with the lockdown. But my kids don't think gender is cool anymore. And they're kind of rejecting it. And I'm wondering if in your kids' peer groups, if anyone else is seeing that kind of, this is dumb or not going there.
I saw a few years ago in various communities in our kids' schools and camps and places, there was like a high watermark where you felt like, oh my God, is there like a straight kid left in these classes, particularly among the girls? And among my broader peer group, people, even people who live outside of New York. Um, and I think this is so anecdotal and not, I don't have numbers to back this up, but it does seem to have cooled down. I also have friends whose kids are a little older than mine, some of those first wave kids, and I feel so bad for them because there wasn't even, those are the kids who are young girls who've been jacked up on testosterone for so long. And like, there wasn't a community of parents to like people who went through it after Abigail Schreier's book came out at least had some resources to go to, some saint models to go to, but the people who went through it earlier. I do have one thing, Jamie, that I'll say to that, which like, I don't know what to do about it and it makes me sad, but like I'll be on social media and I will see, you have friends that at some point in time you would see somewhat regularly and then, years go by and you lose touch because you're different, but it's like you see that picture on Facebook and you're like, oh my God, who is this? And the parents are referring to a kid by a new name and a new thing. And particularly when it's a kid who's been medicalized in some way. And like that happens on my social media with what I find alarming regularity,
Yeah.
where it's like, it's just you think, oh God, like the amount of the future regret that you see coming for these souls makes me sad. And I that's why we still need to keep speaking up and talking about these things because I think there's a lot of young people who are being given false and wrong information and false promises and false hope that whatever the sadness is that's driving them, the discomfort, whatever you want to call it, dysphoria, discomfort, sadness, depression, comorbidities, which is not a sexy word, but there's like for the power of the feelings that people have that drive them to do extreme things. But when I see it and I'm like, oh, gosh, I remember that girl as a young girl. And I remember, and the idea that like, oh, they've always been trans. It's like, really? Because I don't know, like I used to see you every day, year after year, and this never ever came up. And then all of a sudden, in adolescence or post-adolescence, it's like something we're supposed to pretend was always there, this, this transness. And it just, I don't know, it makes me sad. But yes, there's less of it. But I also think, and going back to what we all said before about New York versus the rest of the world, there is that weird thing of like kids in intense urban centers sometimes go through it earlier, the waves, and then you're like, it picks up outside of the big blue cities as it being trans can be the cool new thing for kids when you're the first kid in Wichita to be a trans kid because it didn't come there for it not to be like Midwest prejudice. But you know what I mean? It's like, sometimes the different communities hit those things first and they exhaust it and they get past it and it gets to be uncool. But then come to find out it's the new cool thing in a community that hadn't yet been exposed to the ideas and they haven't gone through the whole roller coaster of it.
So it's like we're the epicenter and those are the aftershocks.
Yes.
I remember meeting somebody a couple of years ago who was from South Carolina. And she said, the trans kids in our school are getting seriously bullied. And one thing I think we've talked about before, and that like people are worked into a frenzy of like wanting to destroy these kids because they've been told that this gender ideology is coming for everybody. Mm-hmm. And we're talking about, okay, we actually hit peak trans and we're on the way down, and it's going from the cool kids are doing it to the uncoolest kids are doing it. And I'm not talking about kids who are naturally gender nonconforming or kids who in the kind of purest sense might have a gender identity disorder or something, in that they might actually really think, I'm so much like the opposite sex, I really should have been born the opposite sex. I'm talking about, neurodiverse kids and overweight kids and kids who were already subject, vulnerable to bullying. Mm-hmm. And now they may be bullied, and on the surface, it'll look like they're being bullied for being trans, but really they're being bullied for being unacceptable in whatever, in a variety of ways. And this worries me on many levels, because it's still part of the self-fulfilling prophecy of trans kids are in constant danger, and B, because I don't want to see any kids bullied for, and when I say bullied, I mean bullied. I do not mean someone says a mean thing to you, or someone misgenders / correctly sexes you, or someone uses a name or pronoun you don't like. I think we need to protect kids' right to not participate in this belief system. But I also think we need to protect their right to participate in it, in that, like, if that's their thing, they can make that request. They can write that name down on a piece of paper. They're free to believe in it. And I feel that strongly as an atheist in America who, has been forced to do all kinds of things, like, pledge allegiance to the flag under God and whatever. Like, no, my mom sent me to school in Georgia with a note that said she doesn't have to say the under God part. I get that it's the law. Anyway, this is part of my long list of reasons I had no friends when I lived in Georgia as a small child.
Lisa, you just said something really interesting, that you said the weight.
Yes, the overweight. Yes, we can go on. We can talk about who's going to be left to identify as trans, and how I feel they will be very vulnerable. And just like they had comorbidities, there's a child entering the room. No.
What is this?
It's the children's day. It's take your children to work day.
Now you're on a podcast. Like, nobody come in here. Okay. Anyway, good thing I actually really like that child, and I love her. So we're good. Both. Anyway, that's Jamie. So these kids have comorbidities, right, of various kinds, not just physical and mental, and they're still going to have them. And those are going to be the ones.
And they're still going to be bullied for those things.
Can I, 2 points on that, Lisa. And it's like, one, actually, there's always going to be bullying. Like there always was, there always will be, and it won't go. Like, of course, I think schools can be a little better at it, particularly when you see one child being really isolated and ostracized, but it sort of doesn't matter what it is, whether it's trans or religion, or you're poor, or you're ugly, or you're dumb, or you're not good at sports. Like there's always going to be some reason. And I think, I don't know if it's a function of getting older or getting, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but like, it's not, I don't want to be heartless, but like, the thing is to protect people, but also it's like, there are going to be kids who go through school as the most popular kids in school and go through kids as the least popular kids. And we really can't change that, but you can make sure that people aren't harmed or hurt, or that you can have a well-trained staff that can be able to identify and make appropriate interventions where necessary. On the trans thing, I don't think kids should have different names going on and different things going on in the classroom. Just like you wouldn't, I don't think teachers should refer to some kids as saved or not saved, or like any sort of religious language that would be that I'm going to acknowledge this about your soul or you're this or you're that in school. It's like you're buying into a belief system. And whether a teacher outside of school believes in trans or not is like the way that whether they believe in Jesus or not. Happy that you have your beliefs, but take them out of school. They don't belong in school. And
I
whenever
get
a
that.
kid,
I'm thinking more about a nickname. Like I
nicknames
mean,
are fine, but like a kid that was Joseph in second grade who wants to be Sally in third grade, I know those are not cool names in the trans world, but like, when the teacher starts calling the kid Sally, then the other kids are supposed to call that kid Sally. And if you don't, you're a bad kid and you're this and that. Like a kid, yes, if someone goes to a nickname, nicknames can be fine and it, but when it's like, now that we know Joe is a trans girl, we're going to do this. There is this compelled speech, which is also a free speech issue part that comes into it for both the teachers and other students. And so I think like biological reality is a really good way to sort things out. And when kids are told like, you're a boy, you're a girl, you're in school, you play in the boys' team or the girls' team, you use the boys' bathroom or the girls' bathroom. If outside of school you decide to tell people you're a girl or a boy or live differently, like, of course, we're free people. People can do whatever they want outside. But within institutions and within ways, the kid in the recess yard can say, oh, I'm not Joe, I'm Sally. And why they just insist on calling me. That's fine. You can say that in the yard. You may get bullied, you may get praised, you may get all sorts of things. But I don't think what I see happening is like all the people are so quick to show their, especially in New York City, as we we're talking about the virtue signaling and the like, I'm so liberal and I'm so accepting and I'm that I'm going to affirm this 5-year-old. We have a lot of very young affirmation going on in these schools, my kids' elementary school, that kind of stuff. That pulls other when it's such a public showing, it pulls other people into it in a way that they have the right not to be pulled into it, right? Like you should be able to send your kid K through 12 through a public school and never have to deal with other people's gender ideology allegiance. They can have it, they can feel it, they can dream it, they can do it. But I should be able to go through the public school system without dealing with other people's trans things, just like I don't have to deal with whether you go to a mosque or a synagogue or a church. Like that's your business and it never impacts me when I'm trying to get my kid to algebra. Like it shouldn't be part of my kid. And so why should my kid at the start of algebra class have to give their pronouns? Like they shouldn't. Like it just shouldn't be in our public institutions in our schools. Privately, people can do whatever they want, but it's not. I think Andrew Sullivan got at that reasonably well, the way that the overreach into institutions was so strong. It just doesn't belong there. And also, I will admit, I think it's bad for kids, and I think it's a bad ideology to push because it's not reality based. And I think is there the occasional severely dysphoric child who's going to grow up to live a trans life and be happier? That you never really know if you're happier in your life if you've taken one path versus the other, but because you don't get to compare and contrast. But for most kids, I think it's a pathway to regret. The more medicalized, the more you have to undo when you reach the undo part.
But we don't have that data to know that. There definitely is not data to support that feeling. We just don't have enough follow-up to know.
Yeah, but Lisa, that we also don't have, yeah, I mean, that's fine, but it's like, we also don't have data that says the same lack of data, the same lack of follow-up. We don't have 15-year data from the data. Also doesn't give us the data that says this is what makes people the happiest and the best. And like it doesn't work either way, And it's like
just don't have the data. That's why one of my one of my many great ideas that no one listened to was this like bipartisan panel. And one of the things we do is we compel the gender clinics to give us to
Yes.
engage in long-term
Yes.
follow-up
Of course.
with the patients they serve.
They already
Let's
served.
find
Yes.
out
Let me
what
get, so
happened.
for example, Lisa, again, to refer to the Andrew Sullivan New York Times article, he talked about, in terms of data and numbers, the extraordinary number of kids who were same-sex attracted kids, i.e. gay, that were in the initial cohorts that developed the gender-affirming care. I'm sorry, but I do not believe that, and yes, it's not a data argument, it's a belief argument, but like that men, when they're in their 30s and their 40s and they figure out for the first time, or they finally come to accept the fact that they're gay, are going to be like, I'm so glad I had gender affirming surgery when I was, 19, 20, 21 years old, 22 years old. Like, I don't need data to tell you that what the data will say when you go further down the road is that the avalanche of regret is going to be even more heartbreaking than those of us who know and can see it and have talked to people and who know that it's coming. But yeah, the data will be helpful because as I said before, some of the folks here in New York don't really care about data and analysis and reason, but some do, and it will be helpful.
Well,
And if they cared about data and analysis and reason, they would care not only at that extraordinary statistic about almost every kid being same-sex attracted in the initial studies, but the completely different kind of young person accessing these interventions today, which was another thing we were never allowed to talk about, because from the moment it was named, which is so interesting for a movement that is entirely reliant on something only being true by declaration, which is what gender identity is about, that we were not allowed to name the rapid onset gender dysphoria cohort, which, by the way, was named by like a liberal, doctor from Rhode Island. I mean, was not named by a conservative, and none of us were allowed to even write about it in liberal press. One reason Abigail Schreier could write that book in a way was that no one else in actual mainstream media was allowed to talk about it, and she had to go to a conservative press because it was the most blasphemous thing you could say, was there's a new cohort and it looks nothing like the original cohort, leaving alone the fact that the original cohort was so like, well, all these gay people looking at that and saying, well, I was that.
Yep.
Two of them right here. I was that kind of
kid. Speaking of going over to the conservative, Maud, how has the welcome been over to the Republican ticket? I mean,
great question, Jamie. It's very funny. I have found that I'm not a historian of the political parties, but if you go back enough, you really do see these like switches, right? And it's like the Democratic Party that I grew up in really thought of itself as the party of the working class people, the party of the unions. My grandfather was a construction worker. He detested Ronald Reagan for what he saw as Ronald Reagan's like destruction of the air flight controller unions. And it's like, I grew up thinking if your people were blue collar and working people, you were a Democrat. And in New York right now, it's the college educated, super elite people who have never worked a blue collar job that are most loyal Democrats, for the most part, that's where it's coming. And the fundraiser that's been thrown for me that I've made the most money, fundraising has been a little bit hard and a little bit slow, but it's been picking up, was from a Republican club that is far away from the rich people parts of Manhattan. It's like I go out to clubs that are there people are smoking cigarettes and coming from their day jobs and super happy that President Trump is the president. And these are working class people, business owners sometimes, and people, but people who like run restaurants and who have day jobs and who work hard and are what I think is like the new face of the Republican Party. It's like the working class party. So for me, it's like two ships passing, it's like sort of switched. And I was happy being a Democrat back when the Democrats were what I thought of as the working people and the middle class people of America. And it's like, gonna quote Ronald Reagan because I always do it. I didn't leave the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party left me. And it's true for me. And I feel like, the Mamdani win, I think I'm saying his name right. I don't care, but I think
We can just call him Zofran here.
Yeah,
That's
Zofran.
Zofran.
So we're gonna yeah, it
But
is
the
Mom Donnie, and it's a very nice.
It's-
I like his name a lot.
Yeah, good fine name. So Zofran, oh my God, now you really screwed me up. Please.
All right.
I'm gonna have to talk about it on like national television. Zoran Mondami. His people and his win, I think, brought into sharp relief why I left the Democratic Party, because that's not my people. I'm not a socialist / communist / Jew hater / like, extreme gender ideology / defund the police / all the crap that I disagree with that young guy about. Yeah, I would like my food to cost less. I literally, the day after he won that primary, I went to an Italian restaurant with a friend for lunch, and I got linguine with clams, and it cost $40. And I was like, oh my God, that's why that kid got himself elected. Like, unbelievable how expensive food is in New York.
Yeah.
I don't think socialism is the answer to that, because it hasn't been the answer in any country, in any time, in any way. I think, the power of capitalism and the free market is the way to do it. But our parties have just switched places. Like more millionaires give money to Democratic candidates than Republican candidates. There's just been this switch. And you see it in the gender ideology. It's like, right, the fact that Riley Gaines, who is not from like University of Pennsylvania, or not from, she's not from like the elite wealthy background, and she is killing it, doing a great, wonderful job speaking up, I think, about the experience of being a female athlete. And it's like the folks who relate to that and understand that, and that are, I just think, so put off by the Sarah McBrides and these like people who are just demanding fealty to a broken, blinkered ideology. And I just, yeah, I'm not saying either party is perfect, and the fringes on either part can be pretty off-putting, right? But in the center right is just making more sense. It did throughout COVID. Like, it was really weird to be in New York and watch Ron DeSantis. I was like, oh, Ron DeSantis, terrible, conservative, Republican. When it started, I used to watch Rachel Maddow on MSNBC, right, to tell you like the swing. And then I was like, wait, the schools are open in Florida, and they're like, the businesses aren't being destroyed, and like people are living their lives. And I'm here in New York. I've got 4 kids in my living room, and I can't, and it's like they're getting sad and fat, and like it's just, what is going on? And why? Like, it's not. And then the private schools went back to school. Schools in Long Island opened up, and I'm like, wait a second, you could shout in the direction of an open school, but not the New York City public schools. And you see that, and you're just like, why is my team and my side and my people that I've been so loyal to and voted to for so long, like, why are they letting me down so hard? And then you look over and you're like, but maybe this other side is like, maybe I should give them a second thought and a second look, like they're getting a lot right. Ron DeSantis in COVID was, for me, a huge, big eye opener, being like, wow, Florida's getting so much right. And then they got a lot of stuff right around gender ideology. There's, the Republicans are getting stuff right about, the fact that you can't be a country without a border. And I'm a New Yorker and a Manhattanite, so the border wasn't really the thing that I focused on so much for a long time. But then it eventually has to be, because it impacts the public safety in your own city, right?
I personally think that they got that stuff right in part because we, as in the left or Democrats, whatever's on this side, got it so wrong. Like, our wrong was so over here that anybody would look reasonable in comparison to it. And I can't tell how much is correct because of a careful analysis, and a decision making based on data versus just so many terrible mistakes. And I'd actually really love to know from Zoran, I'm not going to do it. I didn't watch the debate, so I don't know if anyone asked him, but what does he think about how New York City handled COVID, and what, if anything, would he do differently than what happened last time, which would
State
tell
of
us a lot
journalism, Lisa,
about
that's
him.
a great question, and too
Hmm.
bad you're there to ask him that because they
Hmm.
don't ask good questions like that.
Yeah. Well,
But
Maud, you
is
brought up
he gonna
earlier.
win though? Is this like a guarantee he's gonna win?
No, it's
Not a
Well
guarantee.
positioned to win. A lot will
Okay.
happen in the next few weeks and months as the donor support shakes out and all sorts of other things shake out.
the
I mean,
incumbent
there's no
Eric
real
Adams is running
Republican candidate,
as
and
an
then the
right.
independent is Adams, who's just very soiled, and possibly Cuomo, who couldn't, again, in terms of handing people elections, Cuomo did a terrible job. I think he just thought he had it in the bag and thought that this Zoran was a real pipsqueak.
Well, Zoran
And he
ran a
actually
really great campaign. I mean, he did run a really good campaign. But you were talking,
did.
Maud, earlier. You were talking about institutional trust and loss of institutional trust, and that was a big part of it. And I have that conversation with a lot of people that it's very demoralizing to be uncertain about major events that are occurring in our country or around the world that we have a hand in or we're involved in, and trying to one, trust what news sources are telling you about those and how to feel about them. And everybody is certain. And so they have these convictions. And as soon as a news story drops, everybody's out with their opinion that it seems like they've been thinking about this for 20 years. And it's like, I'm still trying to learn about this. And then you go to news sources and everybody's saying something different. But with that institutional trust, I have that conversation because it's demoralizing to have concerns about these things and then be like, okay, well, let's hear what, let's say, the left or the Democrats have to say about this. And you consider their proposal. And then on the other hand, they're saying, and there's no difference between men and women or men and belong in women's sports. I mean, that gender ideology specifically
Mhm.
erodes has eroded such trust because it's such a fundamental building block of what human existence is all about
Yeah.
is sex differences, right?
Mhm.
So now we're talking about this reckoning, this national reckoning, and for people coming around, the New York Times is printing more, publishing more. I know stuff that's going on behind the scenes where people are kind of putting their foot down and demanding that facts are published about this, and they're not afraid. Writers aren't as afraid
Mhm.
to say what's really going on.
Mhm.
And they're not censoring themselves because GLAAD told them to. But meanwhile, we have in New York this overwhelming surge for a democratic socialist, 33-year-old, Muslim American, I guess, Zohran Mamdani, and whose father is a Columbia professor and his mother is a director. And, and he won, the Democratic primary. So some people like Aaron Reed, the trans activist is like Lisa had mentioned, is talking about how this is the direction to go. That is soon, the moment this reckoning started, we have this big win, and people are very galvanized by it. They see it as a sign of something. They see it as a sign of hope and something that they can keep running with. So, what do you think that means, Maud, for not just New York, but like more broadly, nationally, in terms of where we're going and what this suggests?
So I think Zohran Mamdani is a horrible, terrible, bad candidate for New York City, for me, for my family, for my taxes, for my life. Like, I don't want any part of him. I think he has terrible ideas. But I'm a glass half full kind of girl, and I'm an optimist. So I will say, and one's got to reach hard for this level of optimism, but here it is. I'll lay it out for you. In a way, I don't mind this moment to get a little bit more polarizing because for me, I realized the Democratic Party was the Mamdani AOC DSA party a few years ago, which is why I left the Democratic Party and why I'm trying to build something new. At a certain point, when the foundation is so rotted, when the people who are the pillars of your party don't know the difference between a man and a woman, and they were content to say, wear a mask, vaccinate yourself, and stay out of school for 2 years, even though there were plenty of smart people like Jay Bhattacharya and Martin Kulldorff et al. Who were saying, no reason to do this. And in fact, it's bad for people. And I was reading that, and I'm no expert epidemiologist, but like if I could hear what people are saying and think, I think that makes more sense, right? There's no reason our elected leaders couldn't have that when they buy in so hard to bad science while lecturing me about follow the science and all of that. For me, it's like the foundation is rotted. And so you have to build anew. That's why I'm in a different party. Is the Republican Party perfect? Absolutely not. Like, and there's all sorts of things in the New York City and New York State GOP that are driving me nuts. But you have to start somewhere in building something that's an answer to what is the rot in the Democratic Party for me. And I see so much rot. And so Mondami winning is like, I have this little bit of a thing of like, guys, I told you so. Like, I thought Cuomo was going to pull it out. If you asked me a few weeks before the election, he had an extraordinary lead in the polling. But ultimately, people want to vote for something, not for status quo. Like on the public safety front, Cuomo was there when we signed bail reform into law. Like Cuomo has come up with all sorts of bad policies that have been throughout COVID and through it. He's done some good leading too, and he did some good things in terms of infrastructure and in terms of, things that are better in New York City. And he's a grown up in the room and he knows how to do things. I didn't vote in that primary because I'm not a registered Democrat. But like, in a way, it makes it sharply clear. My plea to the donors of the moment and the people who are freaking out about what the future of New York is, stop saying that like, oh, the Republicans can't win and that because you want to talk about self-fulfilling prophecies. We need to recruit better, smarter people, ex-Democrats like me, but also lifelong Republicans who figured out faster than I did that some of this DSA stuff was really terrible and bad and pulling centrist Democrats off into the left in a bad way. We can build strangely, the Democratic Party, the Republican Party now, to be an answer to the Democratic Party, can build the big tent that the Democrats used to say they were. We can build that big tent here on the right and the center right, because there's just more people willing to have debates. Like I'm pro-choice. I go to some of these Republican events and there are people who are passionately pro-life. They've heard me talk. They're like, we like so much about you, Maud, but why? Like they come up, but nobody calls me like a bigot or a baby killer or a thing. We talk about that, and I say I've been pro-choice my whole life. I still am. I do not agree with the Democratic position of abortion on demand throughout pregnancy. I think it's immoral and grotesque. As a woman who's been pregnant 4 times, I'm like horrified by it, actually. But I really do think the European way of like legalizing abortion up until 16 or 17 or 18 weeks, depending on what country you're in, is sort of the right way to go. And, I can have a conversation where we just disagree. Meanwhile, when I disagree about gender ideology on the left, they drum me out. They write nasty, horrible, mean things about me. It's like there's no room for debate left on the left. And that's why you get the Zoran Mandamis, because it's become cult-like and very when you rule out conversation, you can't talk about whether or not government-run supermarkets are smart or not, or whether it's going to create food lines, because they're convinced that anyone who would suggest that the far left proposal is bad, like communism doesn't work, it impoverishes instead of elevates. They just say like, you're MAGA, you're right wing, you're great, and I'm not saying it's not successful, because you're right, Ben. He ran a really good campaign, but there's no room for like intelligent debate or disagreement on that side. And in a way, this is a hard road, and I wish it, but like the people who know how bad Zoran is have to stop saying, and this goes to all the donors, that they have to stop saying, oh, we have to get Republicans to register as Democrats and vote in the Democratic primary, or, oh, we have to get Cuomo to run because he's the only one can beat him, or, oh, because those are all like reactive, right? It's like, it's not a vision. Like my vision is a city that's well run and that's well governed, that has excellent public schools, that has excellent public services. I agree with Lisa. I think people should have, your basic needs met. But I think where we should fix problems like affordability by letting the free market with safety nets and brakes do the job. We need to create more housing, and we need to, but some lunatic 33-year-old socialist isn't going to create more housing. A system that gets out of its own way and allows builders to build and creators to create is what's going to create a vibrant, thriving economy. And it's like that. I don't know. I look at a place like Chicago and LA, and like we've been trying it in our blue cities. We've been getting further and further radical and more left with worse and worse results, right?
Let
So
me,
it's not
can
working.
I make a case? I'd like to make the case that Zohran Mamdani and Donald Trump are very similar. Charismatic. Wait, I wrote some things down. Divisive, right? There are people who are loving it.
Mhm.
And then there's my text chain with my husband's best friend, which is yesterday I decided to be the best version of myself, but the day before I was being the worst version of myself on it. An extremist.
Yeah.
And some people love Trump's policies, including the cruelty, and some people love Mamdani's anti-Zionism, which is not the same as anti-Semitism. And I also spent a
Come
lot.
on, Lisa.
It's not. It is not. I am
We
from
finally found something we disagree on, woman. There
no
you go.
things. I don't. I like I said, I run socialist, and I don't. I just. I know that Mamdani 5 years ago said queer liberation is defund the police, but I will allow for him to evolve in his views, and he had much more nuanced views than that, during this campaign. But I just think he is the left-wing Trump. And I think
Really think I agree with that.
anti-Zionism is very appealing to young people. I am not a Zionist
Zionism
myself.
is a cover for anti-Semitism 9 out of 10 times. Not always. You can be very opposed to the state of Israel and not be a Jew hater, but they do seem to go
Yes.
hand in glove with most people most of the time.
So the Midwestern in me is getting okay. I'm just gonna
getting uncomfortable.
Yes, I'm getting uncomfortable because I'm like, oh no, they're talking about this. We don't.
Okay, all right, that's right.
Dinner.
This is a gender podcast.
I know. But I had
What am I doing?
thing. I had one thing that Maud said that, and Lisa, I actually am interested to know if you. Okay, Lisa and I have discussed in the past that part of our fear, or at least my fear, is that gender is going to become the new abortion.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Long-term fight, multiple iterations, court after court battle, state after state battle. One of the things you said, Maud, though, about your stance on abortion and the kind of European model, I'm actually suddenly hopeful that this influx, the big tent of the disaffected libs into the Republican Party is actually going to maybe become the salvation of the abortion debate, where we come to a 8-week resolution or something that most 12-week, most parties
Okay.
agree with.
Mm-hmm.
Is that how the Republican Party becomes the big tent?
I think it's already mostly there, Jamie, because if you look at popular like polling on what people actually think about it, like the pro-life movement scored this big victory by getting the Supreme Court justices to undo Roe v. Wade and but like most Americans think people should have the right to get an abortion in like a first trimester abortion, and that gay people can get married if they want, and that like these positions that were extreme a few generations ago, almost unimaginable not that long ago, in my grandparents' day, are now the norm for most Americans I mean, there's still some very committed pro-life people, of course, but where you've seen state by state after Roe v. Wade, where they tried to get rid of abortion in state law, it didn't pass, right? And so
right, in Kansas, it didn't pass.
I think Ohio too, right? Yeah. So I think you have to go where most Americans, right? There are still people who think gay people shouldn't get married. Like that's not going to pass in a state house in a thing because Americans are in a different place. about those things. And yes, I think the Republican Party right now offers the possibility for the bigger tent that the Democratic Party used to claim it is, which, by the way, the sort of super rich, out of touch, illiberal elite Dems still think they're that party. They still think they're the party of the working class, and they're sort of like, oh, they're rolling out like the Barbara Streisands of the world, rolling out the sort of like Republicans are these fat cat rich white men holding up the patriarchy, and like I'm in the Democratic Party, I'm part of the like the working
Well,
class.
they still think the party is Bernie Sanders,
Yes.
AOC, and now.
But it's like they have this notion, this fictionalized notion of what the parties stand for. So I do think that's interesting what you say about gender being the new abortion. Like a little bit, yes, but I think the reason that the abortion debate took a half a century into it is because it really began well before social media. Now everything is so sped up and so much faster, and everybody
Oh.
gets information coming at them in such a faster way. And I think we're more likely to, in the next 5 to 10 years, see an avalanche of detransitioners to the point where people are like, oh my God, like it's like the lobotomy scandal, but more dramatic because of social media. So you'll see images and you'll see kids and you'll see people. The Chloe Coles of the world will, multiply.
I think that there's a big part of the divide between the left and the right, and how they treat their own and treat people who are different or think differently. What I've noticed on the right, the more I've come to know conservatives, is that, like you were saying, Maud, I do find that they have more tolerance for differences of opinion,
Mm-hmm.
certainly.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I hypothesize that has to do with more conservatives and Republicans having a faith, having religious belief. And of course
That's
that
not what I
religious
thought you were going to say.
and of course that faith and that religious belief bleeds into their political views. But in fact, I think it actually does. It's more the opposite, where they have this faith, but they understand intellectually the difference, the kind of division between what their private beliefs are and what society and law and how it functions. And of course, they're going to bring that into it, but I think that they understand that fundamentally. On the left, because there is a kind of a vacuum, a space for that,
Mhm.
politics becomes religion. So you mentioned a cult, it's a cult, or there's such vitriol when you express an opinion, but it's not just an opinion, it becomes heresy. And I
Right.
do think that that's the lack of faith or religion outside of politics, and young people and a lot of really impassioned people are getting really galvanized by this. And I'll tell you, not to get like super into this, but it's no wonder that a huge part of this is driven by phrases like globalize the intifada, and it's not such a surprise that we have a Muslim American mayor, or candidate elected, or I'm sorry, winning the nomination. And it's not a surprise that all of these conversations are going down, and Palestine and Israel is such a central conflict in what's going on locally, because Israel is fundamentally a political ideology. There's no separation in Islam between politics and religion. So it's very
Wait,
seductive.
Islam? Wait, did you?
He said Israel, but he meant Islam.
Islam.
Islam,
I
sorry.
don't know,
Okay.
but I don't know much about.
No, so
I
Islam,
would just push.
there's no separation between politics and religion in Islam.
That can't be
So
true for all. That can't be true for all Muslims. I mean, I just feel
no,
like
Lisa, let me finish. Okay,
okay, but then I want to respond.
no, but it is it's fundamentally a political ideology. If you're talking about Islam and Islamic law, that's what Islamic law is. It's talking, there's no separation between having an Islamic nation and having Islamic law. Now, am I saying all Muslims? No. I can say something about Islam, I can say something about Christianity and not be talking about all Christians or all Muslims, absolutely. But what we're seeing here is, historically, this preceded the 1979 Iranian Revolution. It was the communists and the socialists, and then it was the Islamists. They were anti-Western fundamentally, and they wanted to bring down this regime. And they had this kind of, semi-pseudo coalition, and then it just, blew up in their faces. This Islamist, regime comes into power and executes communists and socialists. So what I'm saying is that this is history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And I think that is something to bring up here, and it's important and it's relevant, certainly in what's going on in New York.
I just want to say, I don't think that conservatives have been nicer to us because they're religious. I think that they are used to being on the back foot, and they've used to having other people's ideas shoved down their throat, and they've gotten some skills to navigate that. And I am treated there are plenty of absolutely nasty conservatives, and I am also like, I hold the door open for the Mamdani thing to work out. I mean, fine, maybe it can. No. But the door is not as open for me on conservatives because, I have been around them a lot in the past few years and have had a rollicking good time with many, but haven't heard a friggin' word, despite personally asking, going from person to person. Why don't you talk about the Dutch protocol and about how these treatments, were homophobic, sort of in their room? Why don't you speak up for gay kids? I haven't seen a willingness to roll back a single friggin' thing on abortion.
I agree with you on that.
And what we're seeing is we're going to have states where you can transition a child young and where you can get an abortion, and they're linked everywhere, and the Republicans link them too. So you're not going to you can't have any control over yourself. So I'm not optimistic about either party. And I realize that people in my neighborhood will be horrified when I come out next week with a piece about how Mamdani is the left-wing Trump, which I've just decided to write. But that is what I think. And so I see it as a replication of the extreme. I'm interested that Maud thought, like, yeah, let's go a little more polarized. I'm so desperate. It's like having parents who are screaming at each other for 10 years. I didn't have that. My parents just got divorced, but I don't want it. I don't want it anymore.
Hey, Lisa, let me clarify one thing about that. So people say, I don't want us to be more polarized as a nation or a city, but my pleas for people to understand, do you hear that? So, my pleas to get people to understand that the people wanted me to run as a Democrat, as a common sense Democrat. And I'm like, been there, done that, tried that. The Democratic Party is so far left in Manhattan in particular, but in New York City and in New York State to some extent, that I think the path back to the kind of normalcy I care about, where people can have a reasoned conversation about how gender ideology is bad for gay kids, or how we have to have a reasonable compromise about abortion, or how we have to protect First Amendment values, or have sane economic policies to address affordability other than government-run grocery stores. All of those things, which I think are important issues in which our government has to respond to, I don't think it's possible to do while we live in a city and a state that is a one-party ruled city and state. I don't think the Democratic Party is going to get us out of any of that. And if, for me, the silver lining of people realizing, the donor class and the voter class realizing, oh, if we let all of our decisions about who we're electing be made in the Democratic primary, we get a 32-year-old Jew-hating socialist / communist. And that's what he is. And I just think that the upside for me is, now we have to really talk about voting for people outside of the Democratic Party. The people who would tell me, Republicans can't win, you have to run as a Democrat. Now they're like, oh, we want to elect somebody other than the Democrat in the general election. And I'm like, well, that's what I've been saying all along, to get to good, sane policies. But y'all waited until like the fourth quarter to figure this out. I figured this out a while ago. And that's where I am on that, to clarify the polarizing thing.
Lisa, I just want to, yes, can I just say, yes, you were right on the one point though. I honestly think so much about gender could have been won quicker or faster or easier, in a sense, if the Republican Party could have just accepted and moved forward the true conversation, which was that the Dutch protocol was targeting proto-gay kids. And if they could have acknowledged that, who that was built for, and said it in state houses, I think that they could have ended this quicker. And there is still so much pushback. If I say the phrase proto-gay kids, the same people that will have my back when I say we should not be transing children will scream down my throat that there's no such thing as a gay kid, when we all remember that 7-year-old kid from the 80s and everybody whispering around him, oh, they're going to grow up to be gay. We know that those kids existed. We weren't like, by acknowledging their existence wasn't making it so that they couldn't grow up to be straight. We were just acknowledging that we saw them for who they were early on. And that's the one thing about the Republican Party that I want a lot of apologies, but I want them to apologize. And I also want them to pivot on their legal strategies.
Well,
Can you blame
over the Republicans? Maud is taking over the Republicans. A New York City Republican is the same thing as a Midwestern Democrat. And she's going to bring it back to the center where people can say the things that everybody knows but are considered blasphemy.
Say true things out loud. Let me just say one thing, and this is really in the weeds for to Lisa and Jamie about that, is that your guys are saying, like, I get you, I hear you about like how bad trans stuff is for gay kids. I've talked about it at my community education council meetings to the derision and howls. And when I mention lesbians, it's like they all get so mad at me. But part of the problem is like it took people a long time to figure out this trans stuff. Like, it was something most people had never heard of a few years ago. So saying, why didn't Republicans figure out the Dutch protocol gay stuff? It's like, people didn't even know. They're trying to be polite. I had a conversation with Kara Dansky a few years ago. I was like, well, no, I'm fine with using people's preferred pronouns. And Kara was like, oh no, I don't do that. And I was like, well, I know trans people. I'm not going to like refer, first of all, you rarely use a third person in front of a person you're talking about. So it's such a tempest in a teapot. It's so silly anyway. But like, I was perfectly fine. I would have referred to Chase Strangio as a man and not a woman 2 or 3 years ago when I was talking to
before you heard her voice, and then you gone, oh well, that can't work.
Before Chase showed up at my school board meetings to lecture me and complain to me, and push the nonsense suicide line that she then had to, walk back in the Scrimeti litigate, the Scrimeti Supreme Court case, the oral arguments. But so I think, like, even a few years ago, I had different takes and understandings. So to expect a party that for the most part had nothing to do with the trans stuff, they weren't pushing the laws, they weren't pushing the protocols, it wasn't part of their culture, to expect that party to have gotten Dutch protocol gay issues correct when most other people still don't even know what that is or figure it out.
Well, they know now. Now. They've been working, they studied this.
What would you do? I mean, how can you blame these conservatives who it's not like they were just like, oh, they didn't have these kind of half-ass objections to gay marriage. They fundamentally believed that it was wrong and that it was eroding. So how can you really, I'm a gay married man, but how can you really blame conservatives in the right for co-opting this when they say, oh, this is going to be a slippery slope. This is a slippery slope. And then it looks very damn well much like it was the slippery slope that opens this whole Pandora's box of batshit crazy things. So of course they're not going to be like, maybe we should reevaluate our stance about gay so that the trans thing goes away. They're like, no, this is our opportunity to make it all go away.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wave our God-fearing one. Maud, I don't know if we told you, but at the end of our podcast, we do non-gendered recommend anything that you have enjoyed of any kind, something you've eaten, read, watched, listened to. But before you tell us that, which we may not have told you, you had to prepare. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about your platform as running for DA of Manhattan, etc.?
You did not tell me, but that's no problem. I have no shortage of opinions, Lisa, as you know. So maudformanhattan.com. You can go there, you can sign up, you can donate, you can support, you can see more about the particulars of my positions on public safety issues. I just read a book called Tomorrow, Tomorrow, and Tomorrow. I think that's the title, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, that I absolutely loved. And I used to be such a big fiction reader, and then I have shifted over the years to be a little bit more of a nonfiction reader. And this was a straight up fiction book that I was just like waiting for people to stop talking to me about something so I could go back to read my book. And I loved it. It was really, really good. And I went a few days ago with a girlfriend to the Russian and Turkish baths on 10th Street. And I have to say, I hadn't been there for a really long time. And oh my Lord, if you're a New Yorker and you haven't been to the Russian and Turkish baths, you have to go.
Is it ungentrified? Because I haven't been there for 18
Ungentrified,
years.
ungentered, or you mean, are we gender or gentrified?
No, gentrified. Like it was old
You're
school.
gentrified.
I haven't been for 18 years.
It's still like a kooky Russian guy at the front place, and it's still got a sign. It's, for those who don't know, it's funny as hell. I think their names are Boris and David, but it could be something else. But it's like the story goes, it was two brothers that ran it together, and then they had some falling out. So now they do different days. So like if you can just go in, you don't have to know anything about the feuding Russian brothers, and you can just buy a single day pass and go have a good sweat in the saunas and everything. But if you want like a pass to use it multiple times, you would buy it from one or the other brothers, and it was good on one day and not the other day. It's hysterical and funny, I think. But it's like a sauna that's a real sauna, like bring a lot of water, and you can get like, you know, scrubbed down by these Russian guys who like do this like super body scrub. You walk out of there feeling like $1 million.
They'll hit you with a big leaf too.
Oh, they will. They have this big bucket of oak leaves.
I want to go.
Next time you're in New
time.
York, Jamie, we'll go.
Okay.
It's the best thing, and it's just absolutely wonderful. So this, and it's like a lot of old guys. It's co-ed on certain days. It used to be all male. There's some all male. It's all male or co-ed, and it's like, but everyone's friendly and nice. People kind of mind their own business. And I never do the cold plunge, but I did the cold plunge.
Cold plunges are amazing.
Oh my gosh, I did it for the first time ever. I was like, I just have to go do it. But I go in, I plunge in, and then I get right back out. But other people go in and they sit and they like hold their hands like this and they keep themselves in the cold water. And I'm like, oh my Lord, I don't know. I just couldn't do that. I have to build up to that.
Beat me with
Read a good book tomorrow, and go to the Turkish baths.
Yes.
On 10th Street. Sorry, what were you saying, Jamie?
Said beat me with a leaf and drop me in a cold one.
Yeah, totally.
Perfect.
Next time you come to New York, build in at least half a day so we can
Okay.
go do that.
I will.
What about you, Jamie?
What do you have
do you
for
got?
your non-gender recommendation? She's gonna
These
have
are my
garden.
leeks. I've been harvesting my leeks all week. They're freaking amazing.
Beautiful.
Aren't they so? And they'll dry out like this and they'll stay like a decorative plant.
Pretty.
Beautiful.
Oh, this is my thing. I've just been harvesting leek bud, whatever these are.
I
Love it.
want to grow leeks.
Are those leeks like the leeks you eat food?
Yeah, and then you let them go to seed. This is
I
what
had no idea that's what they looked like.
Yeah, they go to seed, and then that's the seed pod. Yeah.
Suddenly, I don't care about gender, politics, religion.
You want my Midwestern garden and the
I just care
cucumbers.
about
Every day
leeks.
I can just go pick cucumbers and tomatoes soon. Yes. Okay.
Lisa, what about you?
You know, this always happens to me where I'm like during the week, I'm like, I have so many things to recommend. I've had a whole life outside of gender, I think possibly. And then we sit down here and I haven't written them down anywhere and I've forgotten all of them. There's several teenage girls running up and down the hallway. But so I have something, you know, every year I have a sandwich party. We had to cancel this year due to a family member getting sick. So the sandwich party is you invent a sandwich and you come as anybody who wants to, and you make a lot of your sandwich and share them. And some years it's a contest and some years it's not. You know, we're hippie semi-socialists, so it's, you know, not the same. I guess if we were really socialists, it would be exactly the same and everyone would win a trophy. Oh, that's just called parenting. But so anyway, I invented a sandwich while we were talking. It's the grilled Mom Donnie government cheese sandwich. And I would like everyone who's listening or watching to make one of those this week and take pictures. And then please send us the pictures.
God, government cheese sandwiches.
Yeah, Mom Donnie, grilled government cheese.
That you need to eat Zofran afterwards.
I feel like I have to retire that joke. I'm going to be, it's now it sounds racist, even though it's just changing. It's one of my favorite things to do, which is to change one letter in a word, and then it's totally different. And that I think wordplay is a spiritual experience.
Oh,
So,
okay.
Wasn't there like a
Let's
movie like Don't Mess with the
Oh yes. Oh yes.
what is it? Don't mess with the
Borat.
what?
Borat's movie.
Don't mess with the Zohan.
Yeah,
Okay, so
it
that's
was
what
a
I always
Borat
think about
movie.
is Zohan, and then also Zoltar.
Oh,
I think of Zoltar. It wasn't
And
Zoltar in
Big.
Big.
And
Yes.
Big at the end of Big, the Zoltar machine. I think you should call it the Zofran government cheese sandwich.
Yeah, yeah,
okay.
yeah.
We'll see. I want it to be delicious.
And
That's
you
part
don't,
of
but
the
and
challenge.
people make
Oh,
up what they
maybe
put
not.
on it. It just has to be government cheese, and that has to be the title of it.
That's just the title. You interpret that however you want. You can
Got
also
it.
interpret sandwich. The rule of sandwich party is you have to be able to defend it as a sandwich, but it's a little bit like a woman is someone who feels like a woman. It's a sandwich. It could be a sandwich that identifies as a sandwich. It could be a trans sandwich. I'm hoping we'll get a lot of emails from people. Ben, tell us your recommendation, but then maybe also where people can find us if they want to send us sandwich photos and stuff.
Well,
and
you find us
subscribe
at
and support us.
Informed Dissent, our Substack, and you can find us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify as well. We also have our weekly paid newsletter that comes out every Friday at 4 o'clock for paid subscribers, and I put that together each week. And yeah, right? That's it, right? Substack,
Yeah, but
Informed
what's your
Dissent.
non-gender recommendation, Ben?
Oh, I am telling, maybe it's about something that I'm excited about. I am a big geek for Jurassic Park, Jurassic World franchise. Next week is the premiere of the new film. And it's kind of like an event for me that when this happens. So I'm super excited.
They
I
lost
like
me on the last one.
the last one was horrible. It was
Okay,
horrible.
thank you. I
But
was
this
hoping
is
you would
this is
agree. Okay.
this is a rebirth. It's called Rebirth, and it's got
Oh, good.
ScarJo in it and Jonathan Bailey, who's drop dead gorgeous.
Okay.
And I think it's going to be really, really good
So
and
you go look
fun.
not at the dinosaurs.
And what?
So you like to not look at the dinosaurs.
No, I love the dinosaurs. I love everything about I'm just a bit, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's because I was at this really impressionable age when it came out, it was very impressive and scary, and I was just old enough to see it, and so it's just been something that I've kept up with and really loved and always loved. And I'm writing a review about it for a magazine, so I'm excited to do that. Anyway, yes, that's it.
Awesome.
Maud, thank you so much
Thank you, Maud.
Love being here. Thank you guys so much for the invitation.
Great. Well, you'll have to come back sometime, and good luck with in November and with everything, and we'll keep in touch.
With the campaign.
Yes.
Thank you guys.
All right.
Have a great week, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.